morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today's theme is Hollywood out of control. Plus one other story which has absolutely nothing to do with that theme, but which I feel you need to know about. So, what's one of the areas where Hollywood is out of control? I'd say after yesterday's big headline, many would agree it's live-action fairy tales, a genre where Disney is the big pusher, but also, to be fair, a genre which Disney started and has had tremendous success. So what's the big headline? It's that Disney is aggressively pursuing a live-action Winnie the Pooh. And the response to said headline was practically universal, and that's that, hey, April Fool's was yesterday. But this is no joke. Disney has hired a writer-director to spearhead a live-action Winnie the Pooh, and they are indeed moving forward, as they have been with many live-action fairy tales announced over the last few days, most notably also Mulan, which we discussed earlier this week. And I think people's second reaction after the whole April Fool's thing was, man, Disney is a bunch of greedy bastards. But surprise! I'm actually going to defend Disney somewhat, because while I feel live-action fairy tales themselves might be out of control, I don't think that Disney is. I think Disney is somewhat of a victim of live-action fairy tales run amok. So allow me to explain. The thing is that fairy tales are not copyright protected. They are available to anyone to adapt. So Disney, having opened Pandora's box, so to speak, has found themselves in a fairy tale arms race with the other studios who see Disney's success and want a piece of that action. For instance, they can't do Snow White because Universal has already taken that. They can't do Peter Pan because Warner Brothers is doing that. And Warner Brothers is making a competing live-action Jungle Book, which right now I believe is set to come out the same year as Disney's, because I think Disney pushed their Jon Favreau one back. So basically Disney is scrambling to tie up as many fairy tales as they can. Oh, and by the way, there's also the Sofia Coppola The Little Mermaid that's being developed. So I think that's why you haven't seen The Little Mermaid move forward at Disney, by the way, which would seem like a no-brainer. And I would take on Sofia Coppola. I'd be like, I have Alan Menken and Howard Ashman's songs. Get out of my way, Coppola. I think they would clearly win that battle, but we'll see. But I think that's what's really happening here. I don't know when these movies are going to come about. I don't know when they're going to actually make Mulan. I don't know when they're actually going to make Winnie the Pooh. And there are problems with Winnie the Pooh. But I think that Disney is just trying to lock these down and stake a claim to them. Kind of the way that these days studios will claim a release date, which is also a little bit out of control, years in advance. Often with an untitled project. They don't even have a movie for that slot, but they're like, I'm taking it. And they'll usually just say which area it's in, like Untitled Marvel, Untitled Pixar, Untitled Disney Animation. They're big brands. And maybe someday we'll see a untitled live-action fairy tale sitting on a date saying, move along, Warner Brothers, Universal, Sony, etc. This is mine. So I think that that's one instance of why you're seeing Winnie the Pooh begin to take shape. I think the other will be the success of another silly old bear, and that would be Paddington Bear. Paddington Bear, lo and behold, while it seemed like it was a DOA family property. I don't know why I said adult. It's definitely not an adult film, but it is enjoyed by many adults. I myself thought Paddington turned out to be surprisingly good. I think it was also a surprising success. Paddington is one of the top 10 grossing films of the year worldwide to date. I don't think it'll stay there after we get through the summer, but we're talking about a movie that's made over $250 million worldwide. Paddington! And that is nowhere near as popular a brand as Winnie the Pooh, especially worldwide. In the UK, of course, Paddington is very popular. And Winnie the Pooh, by the way, also hails from the UK. So I believe that Disney saw the success of Paddington and was like, man, we were asleep at the wheel. We've been totally beaten out by David Heyman, Mr. Harry Potter, and this film, which is making us look bad. So they're like, why don't we make a Winnie the Pooh movie? So that sounds like a good idea on the surface, and I think if they did a traditional Winnie the Pooh film, it might have been a little bit better shape. But the way they've decided to adapt it, I think is going to lead to more problems. So what are they doing? Well, they've decided that they're not going to have a child Christopher Robin. They're going to have an adult Christopher Robin who comes back to visit his home and rediscovers his old friends Winnie the Pooh, and Rabbit, and Kanga, and Roo, and Tigger, of course, etc. So I'm sure many of you are thinking right now the exact same thing that sprung to my own mind, and that's that Ted's already done this, and it would be very hard, I think, for Disney to compete with Ted. I think Ted is an adult movie, but Ted has already gone there. It's already taken it there. And I think in comparison, a Winnie the Pooh with the same setup could seem quite tame, and that I think is a real danger for the film. And they seem to be addressing that, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But I think that Ted has already mined this territory, not just with one film, but a sequel that's coming out this year. So I don't know how Winnie the Pooh can possibly encroach on the same territory. Now, I think they're probably hoping this will be more like Hook, where Peter Pan grows up, and you have to deal with those things about the magic of, oh, you don't believe anymore, oh, but now you do, and you realize that, just because you're grown up physically doesn't mean you have to grow up inside. The typical Hollywood theme that they like to have in some movies, but which was very successfully achieved with Hook. Now, I think that's a pretty good way to go with it, but I question who they've put at the helm of this film to be able to deliver that. Now, Steven Spielberg can deliver that in spades in his sleep, but this gentleman, Alex Ross Perry, not Alex Ross, the comic book artist, when I started to read the name, I was like, oh, no, it's somebody else. But Alex Ross Perry is an independent writer-director, and he just recently did Listen Up, Philip with Jason Schwartzman and Elizabeth Moss. A film which, by the way, nobody really saw and nobody really talked about. So it's not even like he's a hot independent filmmaker. He's just an independent filmmaker. But maybe Disney feels, oh, this guy is great. He's going to bring in some edge. And they've also hired an independent filmmaker to do the Pete's Dragon live-action adaptation. Although many of you pointed out, Pete's Dragon started out as live-action as well. So it's not so much a live-action adaptation as just a remake with better special effects, which is also something that Hollywood seems to be out of control with. So anyway, I think that Disney is making a mistake hiring these indie voices, these edgy voices. Because when they've had their success so far, it's been with extremely commercial directors, right? You've had Tim Burton with Alice in Wonderland. Sam Raimi has proven he can do mainstream with the Spider-Man films, the Spider-Man trilogy. Whatever people might say about them in hindsight, let's not forget they were tremendously successful when they were released. So Sam Raimi did Oz the Great and Powerful. Then they had Robert Stromberg, the production designer, on many a live-action fairy tale and Avatar take over as director, so he really was in that mindset. And then, of course, Kenneth Branagh, he's proven that he can do mainstream films with Thor. So, and also his Shakespearean adaptations often were candy-coated and sumptuous, and lavish in terms of production design and costumes. So these choices made sense. But these other people they're applying, maybe they have hidden mainstream depths. Maybe they can make the leap. But I feel it's a much riskier choice, and especially with beloved properties like Winnie the Pooh. I think Winnie the Pooh has a very specific tone, and it's also a very popular and very successful brand for the company. So they don't want to ruin that either. So suddenly when people see Winnie the Pooh at the theme parks and in the Disney store, they're like, oh yeah, remember that crappy movie Disney made about that? That was horrible. Kind of like what people expected Paddington Bear to be. But that, of course, was, as I said, a pleasant surprise. So I can see where they're coming from. I can understand Disney's, actual panic here and wanting to lock down these films. But I hope that in an effort to lock them down, they don't end up making poor creative choices. So we'll see. I'm curious, what do you think of a live-action Winnie the Pooh, especially now that we've discussed it in depth and maybe you see a little bit where Disney's coming from? And also, what do you think of the idea of an adult Christopher Robin and this person they've hired to direct? Write and direct, actually. All right, so what's another area where Hollywood is out of control? That would be movies based on toys. And one of the big pushers here is Hasbro. Hasbro has a lot of toys, and they have a huge success with Transformers. It's one of their only successes, pretty much. I mean, the G.I. Joe movies do well, but I think that they're kind of like, the bastard cousin of the Transformers movies. And, what's the bastard cousin of the Transformers movies? Because people don't regard those too highly either. But I think they're fun. And I have to say, the last G.I. Joe movie was a lot of fun as well. If you haven't seen it, it makes for an excellent rental. But also they had a lot of success with Ouija lately, and they're planning other things. They have their Gem and the Holograms movie coming up. They also have, let's see here, they have the My Little Pony movie. They're really working hard to get their brands into the multiplex. And they've got another one coming in, and that would be Play-Doh. And I actually think this is a pretty strong idea, because when you think about it, Play-Doh can be really used in a fun, all-ages manner, and that's like Mr. Bill on Saturday Night Live. I think Play-Doh can be something that, can be molded and shaped into a really great movie. So they have a pretty interesting creative team they're putting together here. Paul Feig is in negotiations to direct, which means Melissa McCarthy will be playing with Play-Doh, or another female comedian, because I think Paul Feig realizes that he really excels best with female comedians. And even if he thinks maybe if there's something deep inside him which feels that he could do something else, I don't think he's going to risk it. I think this is his brand. Speaking of brands, Paul Feig is, I direct female comedians to success. So he's making the Play-Doh movie. He'll be directing it. But then here's an interesting choice. The writer they hired has like hardly any credits. His name is Jason Micallef, and his biggest credit is that film Butter from a few years ago. You know, it's the one with Jennifer Garner, etc., and it's about people like in the Midwest or Middle America sculpting butter into these amazing entries into a competition. So, Rob Corddry was in this film as well. Nobody really paid attention to it. It had a pretty good ad campaign, but then it just you know, deflated or melted when it hit theaters. But by hiring this individual, it makes me think that maybe that's the story they're going for, some kind of Play-Doh competition, because you sculpt Play-Doh just like you sculpt butter. And why else would you hire this guy when he hasn't written a successful film and really hasn't written anything, period? But maybe, you know, maybe it's a totally different storyline, but it is being described as a live-action Play-Doh movie, not an animated Play-Doh movie. So I think that Play-Doh probably won't be the main, you know, the protagonist. It won't be a can of Play-Doh at Toys R Us being like, somebody buy me and mold me into my future self. It'll be, you know, about the molder. So I'm very curious what you guys think of this. I kind of feel like it's a good idea. I think they have something here. I'm not saying it'll end up being something because there, as we all know, there are plenty of opportunities to make horrible, catastrophic mistakes in development, but I think, again, this is something I would greenlight, and I think that it is shaping up nicely. And I think it does have the potential to be something on the level of a Lego movie. But I'm curious to what you think. All right, so we're going to get back to areas where Hollywood is out of control with the viewer question. But then I have that story I promised you about something that has not related to this theme, but which I feel you need to know about. And this is a story that's been developing in Hollywood for a few days now, and it's to the point where if you're interested in what's going on in Hollywood, you should know about it. And some of you might have even seen this headline. And that's the news that there's a major shakeup between two of the biggest talent agencies in Hollywood, CAA, Creative Artists Agencies, and UTA, United Talent Agency. And there's also one other area where we're having a switcheroo. We'll get to that in just a second. But this is the big headline. And that's that pretty much CAA's entire comedy division jumped ship for UTA. Now, sometimes agents will jump ship, and sometimes there'll be a number of them, like 3 or 4. But this is an even bigger number. This is like 6 or 8. I believe it's actually up to 10 by now. This is a mass exodus from CAA over to UTA, and apparently they did it, you know, very, very top secret, so that they totally blindsided CAA. CAA woke up one morning and found their entire comedy division was sitting over at UTA. Now, what's the big problem here besides losing some of your top agents and an entire division? Well, often people's clients go with them. So, one of the first to go was Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt, of course, a huge star, thanks to Guardians of the Galaxy and also the upcoming Jurassic World. Disney and Spielberg want him for the new Indiana Jones. He's now, CAA thought, hey, that's our guy, but now he's UTA's guy. So this is really a big news story within the industry. They're interested to see what other clients will defect and jump ship to UTA and follow their agents. And then also CAA, though, has filed a lawsuit against UTA. You know, this happens, this is not too unusual when agents will leave and go to another agency. The agency they left will sue for a cut of commissions for a certain period of time because, you know, they are taking money out of the, you know, the agency's pocket. And it's supposed to be something written into your contract to protect against this. Now, as we know from some negotiations, like Jennifer Lawrence saying, like, I know I'm signed up for the rest of the Hunger Games series, but I'm not coming to work unless you pay me substantially more. Apparently, there's some room for, you know, elasticity in these contracts that they sign in Hollywood. I guess because it's a small town and people are powerful. These agents do have these clients, and I guess CAA doesn't want to burn bridges any more than they have to. But they are suing for a cut of commissions going forward for a certain amount of time that they feel that they are owed. So that's a very interesting story and a big thing that's happening that you should know about. And the other thing is that Sony lost a major producer, Mike DeLuca. Mike DeLuca is leaving Sony on good terms because he wants to jump over to Universal to produce the rest of the 50 Shades films. 50 Shades was something he was producing before he went to Sony. It's obviously a huge success. It's the biggest movie of the year right now, over 500 million worldwide. And I think he obviously wants to maintain his cut, speaking of, you know, cuts of huge profits going forward for the rest of the films. So he said, Sony, I'm sure you understand this is just too much money for me to turn down. I'm heading over to Universal. And Mike DeLuca, by the way, is also an interesting character. He's had a very long career in Hollywood, very prolific and successful producer, but never really established his own independent brand because he's almost always been in a studio. So he's not like a Joel Silver or a Harvey Weinstein or a Scott Rudin or a Jerry Bruckheimer, you know, these directors that everybody knows about the producers that everybody knows about by name. But Mike DeLuca is somebody that people know by name within the industry. So he's very famous in that regard. And then another way he's a little bit infamous is that he, of course, it was revealed, was being paid substantially more to hold pretty much the same position that Anthony Minghella's daughter, Hannah, holds at the studio, but the difference seemed to be that one was a man and one was a woman. And this is some of the paid discrepancies that Patricia Arquette was alluding to when she made her speech at the Academy Awards. So Mike DeLuca, a big name, a name you should know as well if you're interested in covering, knowing what's going on in Hollywood. And so that's another shakeup that's going on in the industry. Not to the level of the agency shakeup, because that's a very contentious breakup, but this one done on good terms, but still a big move. All right, so now that you know about that, let's go back to our theme with the viewer question. And this comes from P. Whitty. And P. Whitty said, "Hi, Grace. I have a question for you. I just saw your review for Fast 7. It reminded me of the Robin Wright movie trilogy you reviewed last year, in which she plays herself in a future where actors' images are literally owned by the studio. With the advent of digital Paul Walker and soon digital Philip Seymour Hoffman, do you think this fictional future is becoming a reality? Last year there was that creepy Dove commercial starring Audrey Hepburn. And also I would also add the Fred Astaire vacuum commercial. So P. Whitty says, how long before our favorite long-dead actors are starring in movies again? Thanks for your time." Well, thank you, P. Whitty, for your question. I think it's an excellent question and very appropriate as Furious 7 officially hits theaters today. Of course, it opened last night at around 7 p.m. And I'm sure many of you went to see it. I'm getting tweets from you guys, which is awesome. If you tweet me you holding your movie ticket for Furious 7, you might just end up on Movie Math on Monday. So anyway, I think this has been something people have been worried about for a few years now, particularly with dead actors, being able to animate them. And I do think the Audrey Hepburn commercial was very odd. And I also think it was in poor taste. I think, pimping out actors digitally who have passed away is in pretty poor taste. I don't think Audrey Hepburn would want to advertise for Dove chocolate. I know often the money used for these stars' likenesses goes to charities, but not all of it goes to charities. There's like this dude who had a spotlight on 2020 like a year or so ago, and he handles most of the licenses. He's like the agent to passed away stars, and so he's making a lot of money off of it. And I just think that if you're going to do this, it should be done in tasteful fashion, like the way they did it with Paul Walker, so that he could finish out the franchise and we could say our goodbyes. I think that was very appropriate. I also think it's appropriate to use digital copies of actors for stunt doubles. We see this done in the Avengers films, for instance, all the Marvel movies, and I think it's very effective. And it has, especially when you're doing comic book movies, right? Things that an actor and a stunt double couldn't possibly do, we have our digital doppelganger to take care of. But as we all know, Hollywood is often out of control and can't help themselves, and takes technology and does things they shouldn't do with it. And I think that this is an area where the way you're going to have to protect against this is if you don't support it. So I think we are very close to seeing this potentially happen. We'll see who decides to cross the line first and in which way they do it. Of course, every situation is unique, but if something doesn't sit right with you, the best you can do is not support it. But I do think we're on the cusp of that. I think the better use of this kind of technology is to do motion capture acting, where an actor is able to play a character they couldn't possibly be made up to look like Andy Serkis does so often, or Mark Ruffalo with the Hulk, or also many of the actors in the upcoming Warcraft, or Benedict Cumberbatch playing a freaking dragon. How else could he do that without motion capture? That's where that technology is used responsibly. And with great power comes great responsibility, Hollywood, especially special effects power. So we'll see what happens, but I think that hopefully it'll only be used in the way it's being used right now, and that P. Whitty, they'll understand that there are some things that are just taboo and plain creepy. All right, so thank you so much for your question, P. Whitty. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and of course, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.